I know you've got an ear out for the start of the podcast, but before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to remind you to keep an eye out for Darryl Lee's limited edition Christmas treats, because they're in stores now. Like the iconic Christmas nougat pudding, so yummy and a gorgeous little gift. And some delicious Chrissy-themed twists on your favourite treats, like the Darryl Lee Rockley Road with chewy red and green jelly pieces, green and red crunchy milk chocolate balls, my favourites, and green apple and strawberry flavoured licorice. Watch them disappear. Your Christmas treats table will pop with colour and scrumptiousness. Spread some joy, bring the fun, and enjoy the Christmas tradition that is Darryl Lee. Hurry before they sell out. Darryl Lee makes Christmas better. This is The 5 of My Life with me, Nigel Marsh. The series where I talk to notable people about 5 of their defining things. The way it works is my guests always choose a favourite film, book, song, place and possession. They tell me their choices in advance so I can research them, but they don't tell me why they've chosen them. That's the subject of our conversation. The reason I devised this series is I wanted to create a slightly different way to gain an insight into the real lives and thoughts of prominent people. Bronnie's writing on living a regret-free life is truly transformative. Her work has had a profound impact on me after I read her book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. I was so honoured to have this heartfelt conversation given her famous aversion to doing personal interviews. So, Bronnie, welcome to 5 of My Life.
Thank you, Nigel. It's a delight to be here.
Now, I know you are a very private person, so the question I wanted to start with is, how was it deciding on 5 areas of your life to talk about? Was that difficult, or were you just thrilled that I wasn't going to ask you about the 5 regrets all the time?
Certainly the latter. I'm looking forward to a conversation that isn't about the 5 regrets. But I am a really private person in my everyday life and day-to-day life, but I've written 2 very personal memoirs, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, and then my 3rd book, Bloom, is a second memoir, which I certainly never saw coming. And so I'm sort of used to sharing aspects of myself, but I was exposed to fame at a really young age when I was a kid through my father's music career. And I think because of that, I realised fame is not real, and I guarded my privacy the whole way through the growth of my career. So I've been able to manage it where my neighbours don't even know what my job is, and we've lived next door for 6 years and we help each other out and everything else. And, you know, all those sort of things, I manage my privacy, but at the same time, I'm happy to share these 5 because they have beautiful stories that go with them. So hopefully that will be nice for the listeners.
Well, we are honoured to have you on. And as is traditional on 5 My Life, we start with your film. And your choice is the best thing to come out of Sweden since ABBA. You've chosen the 2004 Oscar-nominated As It Is in Heaven. Oh, so glad you chose that because it gave me an excuse to re-watch it. But why did you choose it?
I loved the range of characters within the village, and they were portrayed incredibly well. Especially I loved the music, just the power of music in connection and bringing people together. I also loved that the ending was so bittersweet because there was such joy, and it was heart-opening, and the characters were just delightful. There were, even the most broken of them, you could feel sorry for, and you were just sort of cheering everyone on, and it was music that bonded them, and watching how music healed them and ostracised them from other people in the village but brought them together as a choir I just loved it. I just absolutely loved the transformation of all the characters, and as a lover of music, it really opened my heart.
There's so many themes in it that I want to ask you about, but one of them is in Gabriella's song, which is the sort of like the hit song from the film, that the lady who's being abused by her husband finally decides to, leave him and start a life afresh. And in the song says, it's now that life is mine, I've got this short time on earth. And so she's deciding not to waste another second of it. And in my work, and I'm sure in yours, you see people who sort of sleepwalk through life. They slide, they don't decide. And normally it takes what I call one of the big four, a death, disease, divorce, or redundancy, to make them actually think about things properly and start living, true to themselves. How do we help people come to that realization without something catastrophic happening to them?
I would say 70% of people live that way in my observations, but I think we do it by example, because if our example doesn't help them, then they've got to get the wake-up call of the other four things. And you're right, they've got to be catastrophic. But I do believe that through example and through believing in people and just helping them see what is possible, because sometimes it's not that people are intentionally holding themselves back. They just don't know that they can be more than they are. And so if they see your example and they also know where you've come from, so that you're not separate from them, and they think, oh, well, okay, well, that's all well and good for you. You live in the eastern suburbs like you, or, I've got a book and I'm famous, whatever. And so then they don't relate. But if they actually know your humanity and know where you've come from, then your example can actually carry them forward. But other than that, I really believe it's a matter of helping people see what is possible. And for me, it was a Tony Robbins event once. I went to a Tony Robbins event in 1998, I think it was. And that was the first time I actually dared to believe I could live a life bigger than what I was living. And so I think it is possible without catastrophe, but it has to be done gently, because no one likes someone preaching at them, and people have to be ready to hear what you have to share.
So on the subject of preaching, there's a very strong religious theme within that film, As It Is in Heaven. It's just such a great film. And there's one wonderful scene when the pastor's wife is screaming at him, the church invented sin, handing out guilt with one hand, then offering redemption with the other. I thought amazing. Sort of summation of some religious traditions. Would you mind talking about your religious journey?
I'm actually a divorced Catholic. I was raised as a Catholic, but I have since officially divorced because I spend a lot of time in Germany, and it's a very Catholic country. And if you're Catholic and you live in Germany, and I don't know if I will one day, but if you do, the Catholic Church gets 10% of your gross wage, and they can sometimes take a couple of years to catch up on you, and you have to back pay it. And so I just decided, I'm not even a practicing Catholic. I decided not to be a Catholic when I was 18, and there is no way I'm paying the Catholic Church. So I officially divorced. I actually got it all in documented writing, but I grew up with an uncle who was a Catholic priest. He was on my father's side. So I had a very, very strong religious upbringing. I didn't. My dad couldn't have given a damn about it. So that was a nice influence sort of thing, even though his brother would turn up and say mass in our lounge room before we went to school, and we'd just be standing there as teenagers thinking, how long's Uncle Jim staying? I hope he leaves soon. And then when I was in year 11, I think it was, the head nun at my school asked me if I would consider joining the order. And as far as I know, I'm the only one she actually asked. So I think she saw a spiritual searching in me or something, but at the time I was a teenager and hanging out a little bit in panel vans and stuff like that with boys, and I was not joining the order. But as it's turned out, there have been times I considered becoming a Buddhist nun. There were times along my path since then that I did consider it quite heavily, but I've realised that I can actually serve life and our human family better just by being myself, and freedom's one of my highest values. So I count on my own self-discipline and live how I want to live, and stay connected to my soul that way instead.
Well, that's the perfect link to your second choice on Five My Life. You've chosen a book by Eileen Caddy, one of the co-founders of the Find Horn community in Scotland. It's Footprints on the Path. And I have to say, I found that quite a challenging read. I mean, I'm glad you chose it, because I wouldn't have read it in a million years if you hadn't. And I read it cover to cover, but I found it quite challenging. And I'd love you to tell us about Footprints on the Path and why you chose it.
It's my Bible. Like if and I don't refer to it that often, maybe a couple of times a year these days, but if there was if there was a fire, what book would you grab? That's the only one I'd grab. I could live without everything else. The reason I resonate with it so strongly is because a lot of the choices I've made, particularly when I was in my 20s and 30s, have been leaps of faith. And I had everyone else dumping their fear on me, saying, there's a recession on, you've got a good job. I was in banking, and I left banking to go and wash dishes on a tropical island. And people were like, you're crazy, you've got a good career, and you're throwing it all away. And I just wanted to be bare feet in North Queensland. I didn't want to be wearing high heels and stockings and makeup and nonsense like that. So when I discovered Footprints on the Path, it was like at last someone understood me, that I just have to take this leap of faith. I don't know where I'm going to land. All I know is I'm being called away from where I am and what I'm doing now, and I want to find more joy. And so I have the courage to step out there, not knowing where I'm going. In those earlier years, there was just so much fear dumped on me by everybody else because I triggered it in them, and no one could really understand why I would just do that, or I would just quit another job and hit the road with a full tank of fuel and $50 and not know where I was going to end up, and, those sort of leaps. And they weren't all pretty and enjoyable, but they certainly helped me get to know myself and my own potential to create the life I wanted. So Footprints on the Path, it's a spiritual book. It's not a religious book, which I love. It's about just trusting that calling and knowing that life will look after you if you have the courage to honour your joy, be a good person, and just go where it makes the most sense to you, even if it doesn't make the most sense to anyone else, even if you're scared, even if you've got no idea how it's going to turn out. And so that's why it became my Bible, because there were plenty of times along the way where I'm like, oh, my God, what have I done? And how am I going to land after this mess I've put myself in? And then I'd get the book and I'd read it and I'd just feel completely calm again and think, no, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And it always was.
There's a couple of quotes from it that I'd love to ask you about. I mean, the first one, it just struck me like a sort of a wet fish in the face. It's, many of you are still content to accept second best, either because you feel unworthy to receive the best or you are too lazy to raise your consciousness.
Mm.
Word, truth. But the second one that I'd like to ask you about is it's just a simple thing at the start of one of the chapters, which is start this day to create a better world around you. The balance between self-care and caring for the world, and what's your view of that? As we can all do lots of work on ourselves, which is usually a very, very positive thing, and sometimes we can come too insular and not care about the world, and other times we can care too much about the world and not look after ourselves, and how you strike the balance.
You do it without guilt. You actually realise that the heart naturally wants to serve, and if you're not coming from that place and you're just serving yourself and you have no desire whatsoever to serve humanity in some way, then you're possibly coming very much from the mind and living very much from the mind, and you're disconnected from your heart and what it wants to do. But then there's the other end of it where you can serve so much and you forget your own joy and you become a martyr, or you feel like you don't deserve happiness if you're not serving. And there is a balance, and I think it comes down to realising that you are as equally worthy as everyone else you want to serve, and that your joy is equally as important as everyone else you're serving, whether that service is your family, like your children, your partner, your elderly parents or whatever, or whether it's a very defined service role where you have an audience, or you're looking after dying people, or you're a carer or a policeman, whatever. It's realising that you are as equally as important as everyone else. And so finding that balance is realising that, okay, I'm actually allowed to be happy and do things I like that don't actually have an agenda to serve humanity. They may not even have an agenda to serve yourself other than with enjoyment, just to have some fun, because that's the more you give yourself permission to enjoy your life, the better you show up for life anyway, and for serving others.
That's such a wonderful quote. The heart naturally wants to serve. I love that. If you get out your own way, then and act true to your heart and your intention, you will probably end up helping other people anyway without even sitting down to decide to.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes it's a lot more subtle than we think. So I had an elderly lady who used to, this is when I was living in Perth, and she grew a garden. And that garden just brought me so much joy, and we became friends through that. But she was doing that for herself, but she was serving me every day because I was working in an office with no, like, under fluorescent lights, no windows, and seeing her garden every day, morning and afternoon from the train, was such a gift to me. So it's not always that massive and altruistic where you think, right, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to save every person on the planet. You can't save everyone. You've got to save yourself first. But at the same time, sometimes you're serving in a way that is just doing something that brings you joy, and you don't even realise the ripples you're creating for other people, but you've had the courage to get on with it and honour your own joy.
For your third choice, your song that we add to the Five of My Life Spotify playlist, we're going back to the 2000s. We're going to the year after As It In Heaven was released, 2005, to the hauntingly beautiful song by Mary Gauthier, Mercy Now. Gosh, I am so pleased to be adding that to the playlist. I'd never come across, I mean, to my shame, I'd never come across Mary Gauthier before, but please tell us about the song and why you chose it, Bronnie.
I think for me, I've had a lot of lessons in forgiveness, and my dad, he's passed away now, but I was sort of the most like him in the sense that I was the sensitive, creative one, and so I triggered a lot of stuff in him, and he was very cruel, verbally and verbally abusive to me a lot of my life. We did some major healing and we got through it, and by the time he died, he was able to love me as best as he could love anyone. And by that point, I spent most of my life grieving his love, but by the time he could love me, I didn't actually need his love, and so I was just happy for him that he'd reached a place to actually be able to love and say that he was proud of me or whatever, because by then I was sort of thinking, well, at least I was proud of him. I wasn't sort of hanging by that anymore, because he was just human, a very broken human, a very sensitive, lovely, beautiful human, but in his brokenness it wasn't always delivered with the positive traits that he did have in him. So forgiveness was a really big part of my journey, and the way I healed my relationship with my dad was through compassion. But I also had to develop compassion for myself, and just because of the wounds I was carrying in order to heal. And so I found that forgiveness and compassion have played very major roles in my joy, in me getting to a place where I could find my joy and without guilt, and where I could be peaceful. And I find that mercy is a blend of that. That mercy is like the middle ground with a little bit of forgiveness and a little bit of compassion. And so it sort of says to people, okay, I forgive you, and I see that you're broken and you've made some mistakes. I'm just going to give you mercy now, which is that forgiveness and compassion. So the first time I heard that song, the first verse is, my father could do with a little mercy now. And of course that just struck a chord. And then it went on to my brother, and I've got a great brother, but at the time he was a chronic workaholic. I just felt that the second verse really fit him as who he was at the time that I heard that. He's a bit of a different guy now, and much more peaceful in himself. And then it goes on and says how your country and your church and can do with a little mercy. And then it says we all could do with a little mercy now. And so by the time I got to that, the first time I heard it, I was just bawling my eyes out, because of course I deserve mercy. I've messed up plenty of times. I'm not perfect in any of my relationships either, and we all have brokenness to heal. And so of course I deserved mercy from myself and mercy from life as well. So I just find it to be a song that just strips away all the nonsense and all the judgment and just helps you see that humanity is a bit of a mess, but we're also broken and we also deserve a break, and that by developing mercy and practicing mercy, you actually approach life with a lot less judgment and a much more open kind of heart.
It's a beautiful, wonderful, as I said, haunting song, and she's an interesting lady. I mean, I spent a lot of time sort of researching her, having been pointed towards her song by you, and she doesn't shy away from the sort of the darker side of life in her writing and in her art, and her own personal story. I mean, you know, orphan, addict, spent her 18th birthday in jail, and she got sober at 27, and that turned her life around. Would you mind talking a little bit about your own drinking journey and some of your dark moments where you've been, you know, extraordinarily low?
It wasn't drinking. My dad was an alcoholic, but I've never really been much of a drinker. But yeah, I've experimented with a lot of drugs along the way. I had a couple of one particular very scary ecstasy trip when I was in London, and my body overheated, and I spent the night sitting on a windowsill against a frozen window while some stranger, a woman, just kept coming in from the dance club and filling up my water and keeping me topped up. But there were a couple of years there where I pretty much tried. I didn't ever stick a needle in my arm. Thank goodness I had enough common sense about that. But yeah, within a year or two, I think I'd tried speed, cocaine, opium, acid, mushrooms. That was when I was holding a very responsible bank job at the time. I was about 23 or 24 or so. I'd just left my first marriage, and so I'd never really been free as an adult. So I just went a bit crazy. My main poison was smoking pot. My first husband that I just mentioned, he was a dope grower and a social worker, and so he'd help kids sort their lives out and then just grow his plants and sell them. And so I didn't actually smoke much pot in those days. I was pretty straight, and it was after I left him. And so pot sort of just used to just get given to me in like ice cream container sizes, and I'd really battle with it when I was long gone from that relationship. And there was always this battle between wanting it and not wanting it. And then eventually I found my way to my meditation path, and I just straightened out completely. Didn't smoke pot at all for 15 years or so. But interestingly enough, now I don't smoke, I don't get stoned, but I take medicinal cannabis because I live in chronic pain now. I have rheumatoid arthritis. And so recently, in the last 6 months, medicinal cannabis has come into my life. And so it's the same plant, but I take it about a quarter of what the doctor prescribed because I really like being straight.
We're going to fly off to Germany. You've mentioned Germany before, but we're going to the capital city, the largest city, Berlin, which was your fourth choice on Five of My Life. Bronnie Ware, tell us why you have chosen that.
Oh, I just love Berlin, and I love who I am in Berlin. I've only spent 3 months there, but it is my dream to buy a unit there one day, hence why I got so organised and divorced the Catholic Church, because it is something that I imagine when my daughter's up and grown, I would like to spend some longer time there. I found it was a little bit like New York in the sense that anything goes, but I love the European feel of that anything goes. And I loved that I didn't need a car and that the infrastructure was so set up that I could just ride a bike. I still own a bike over there. I've lent it to someone who's living there now, but it was in a friend's basement for a year or so, and then it came out. And I didn't sell the bike because I always intended to go back. And I think Berlin is so different to the rest of Germany. I've had really great success in Germany. So of Five Regrets, I've sold over 1 million copies, and 500,000 of those are in Germany. And then the other 31 languages make up the other 50%. And the film from Five Regrets, there's a movie being made. The producers are from Germany as well. So I have a connection with that country, and my grandma was from Bavaria in Germany. even though it wasn't a very heavy influence at all in our upbringing.
I'm going to change tack a little bit because you mentioned your daughter. Would you mind talking a little bit to that? She's I'm not sure. Is she 11? Is she
No, she's 9. So I became a first-time mum at 45. She was conceived naturally and quickly. I was in a relationship. It wasn't long-term at the time, but we conceived intentionally. I was 44, and I had her. Oh, well, I say 45, 2 weeks outside of turning 45. And she's incredible. I mean, I'd lived such a nomadic, restless life. And part of that was running away and keeping people at a distance. But part of it was a genuine love of adventure and challenging myself. Whereas having Eleanor, it's just grounded me so much because I want to give her the best life I can. It didn't work out with her dad and I, and so I'm a single mum raising her. And within the same time that Eleanor was born, within 24 hours of that, my book 5 Regrets had been rejected by 25 publishers. Within 24 hours of Eleanor being born, I was offered an international publishing contract with Hay House while I was in hospital, and that went on to become the fastest foreign rights seller in Hay House history. At the same time, I also developed rheumatoid arthritis. So I've never known motherhood or disease or book success without any of the other things. So Eleanor sort of has had to grow up fast, having a mum who sometimes is fine but sometimes needs help to get dressed. But she's a delight, and she's an extrovert. I'm a deep introvert. And so that has really forced me out of my shell because I can become very comfortably reclusive, and I love that, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily that great for my own mental health, even though a part of me just feels very comfortable with it. But having an extroverted only child means that I have to really get out and about a lot, and she's just such a ray of light. Everyone who meets her just said she lights up the room. She's bright, and yeah, I have this gorgeous child who thrives on making gifts for people. That's one of her most favourite things. Like when we were in Berlin, for example, she got the nanny to help her make Christmas decorations and then insisted her and I went out on the trains and handed them out to strangers. And I think there are about 50 of them, just paper drawings with some coloured thread through them, all in Christmas symbols. And yeah, we had to go and just give them to strangers, and she was 5 then. We had to go and give them to strangers on the train. That's just who my kid is. She's a gorgeous human being, and I really think that she has the sweetest heart of anyone I've ever met. She is just a naturally sweet kid. Yeah.
She has a heart that naturally wants to serve. Your last and 5th choice on 5 of My Life is The Possession. And you have chosen your guitar. Could you describe it to us and tell us why, Bronnie?
Okay, so it's a Martin C16, which is a small-bodied Martin guitar. Dad was the first lead guitarist in Australia, and he was also a country music historian. He used to have a radio show called Pat Ware's Old Time Country Corner. I wrote my first song when I was 35. I was trying to get a book of nature photos and quotes published, and after 3 years of rejection letters with that, I picked up the guitar and wrote my first song. And so I sort of ventured down the singer-songwriter path then, and it was very confrontational for me. I wasn't a drinker. I couldn't knock back a quick vodka. I was very introverted and reclusive. But it healed me a lot having to go onto a stage. I did all the singer-songwriter nights around Sydney and Melbourne. And then I started getting into some folk festivals, which was an audience more attuned to my gentle songs. And I think initially I wanted to be a good guitarist to prove my dad wrong or something, because he wasn't very encouraging at all to start with. But music actually became a huge part of my joy. And I bought that guitar when someone said to me, like I'd said, I'll get a better guitar when I'm a better player. And this guy, I can't remember even who it was, but someone at a singer-songwriter night said, you'll become a better guitarist when you buy a better guitar. You rise up to that. And that's what happened. And I became a really good, I just loved finger picking and playing, and music actually became very healing. And when I left palliative care, I created a songwriting program in a women's jail, and I taught songwriting there. So that was, a lovely extension of my life experiences that I didn't foresee. But then when Eleanor was born, I got rheumatoid arthritis, and now my fingers don't bend and I can't play my guitar. And so I've sort of lived with the grief of that for 9 years now. And I have this contraption called Cordelia, made by this guy in Ireland who couldn't work out. For him, he couldn't hold chords. He just couldn't get his coordination together. So he made this machine that you stick on the end of your guitar, and it holds down chords, and that you're limited to the 5 chords that he put on it, but you hold this lever and it pushes the hammers into the strings on the neck in the right position. But even like holding that down can be really painful on my wrists. So I can generally only play about 1 or 2 songs at a time anyway because of pain, but it brought music back into my life. And I feel like my journey with the guitar is not finished yet. Maybe it's just a denial and an inability to accept that I can never play again. But I do go through grief where I think, okay, this could be it. But any times I've packed away the guitar and thought there's no point leaving it out, at some point it calls back and comes out again. And so it's just my favourite possession because there's so much of me involved in it, in how it healed me, but now how it challenges me, that I can't play it, but it beckons me. And, yeah, it would be the thing I'd grab with that book if I could only grab one possession.
I've been listening to lots of your music in preparation for this conversation, and you wrote somewhere that your favourite song is Let It Come Through. And one of the lines from one of the lyrics from that song is, just deal with the first step, the rest will be revealed. And I love that note. How I express it to the long-suffering Mrs. Marsh is it's the car headlights philosophy. It is, you haven't got to go up the whole bloody staircase. Just take the first step and then maybe take the next step. And guess what? You end up at the top of the staircase, but you didn't have the whole plan sorted at the start. And I just love that sentiment. In that, A, it's a brilliant song, but B, I think it's a lovely sentiment.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, that's how I live my life. I think that if we dare to not know every step of the way, we leave some space for life to help us. And instead of getting a goal taking 100 steps, it may only take 53 or something, because life just says, oh, yeah, okay, you can do it that way, but here, I'll introduce you to the right person and that'll give you a shortcut. And that way it leaves a lot of room for beautiful, positive surprise and rewards that you don't see coming.
One of my core beliefs is that today only has value because tomorrow is uncertain. If I could have laid out to you as an 18-year-old everything that was going to happen to you, it would suck all the joy out of it. It's the fact that you don't know. If I could tell you now what's going to happen in the next 30 years in your life, I would just be ruining it for you. I don't want to know. I want to make it up as I go. And on which point I have to quote you to you, because I've read your books in preparation of this. And okay. There was one that, before we get to the 6th question, there's one that I just wanted to read to you, because power to your elbow, Bronnie Ware. What an angel you are. What a gift to the world you are. You wrote in one of your books, life doesn't owe you anything. Neither does anyone else. Only you owe yourself. So the best way to make the most of life is to appreciate the gift of it and choose not to be a victim. Beautiful.
Thank you.
You are a legend.
Thank you.
At which point, stop your crying and tell me who is your guest that you would like to hear next on Five of My Life, Bronnie?
Shane Howard, the legendary Australian singer-songwriter. A lot of mainstream people would know him as the main singer for Goanna, who had big hits in the 80s. But Shane is so much more than that, and he has spent his life bridging the gap between Aboriginal Australia and white Australia. He's also campaigned for environmental concerns and got the horse racing off the local beaches and things like that. But he's just a gorgeous-hearted person, and I guess I respect him because he was being an activist in his own way at a time I would never have had. No one was, and it would have taken a lot of courage. I find him to be a very gentle person, very gentle and wise, and yet the legacy that he will leave behind one day is massive, and the work that he continues to do is massive. So I've met Shane a few times and I absolutely love him, but I don't know him super well, and I would be really curious what he would choose for the 5, because you ask great questions, Nigel, and you do your research. And yeah, I think I'd just love to know what this legendary man would choose, and because he's got so much wisdom to share, and I have great respect for him.
What a wonderful nomination. I have taken so much from this conversation. I mean, mercy is the middle ground between forgiveness and compassion. We need to sometimes leave some space for life to help us. It's been an absolute joy researching you and chatting to you. I hope all things in your life continue to bring you blessings, Bronnie. Lots of love from 5 of my life, and thank you very much for coming on, honouring the format and sharing some of your life.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Nigel. Thank you so much.
The 5 of my life was presented by me, Nigel Marsh. Producer, Alex Mitchell. Sound production and theme music by Darcy Thompson and Matt Nicholish.